I am a student, a global citizen, and in some sense, a future refugee. Too dramatic, maybe. But the truth is, displacement isn't always about escaping war or life packed into a single suitcase. Sometimes it's the feeling of not truly belonging anywhere. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a refugee is a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disasters. It's a word heavy with history and burdened with debate. Often, this word can be seen in political discussions, headlines, or protest signs held high in the sky. It influences elections and international relations, but it also embodies emotion and loss. The loss of home, stability, and personal identity. Beyond policies or statistics, the word refugee, depending on who speaks it, can evoke both fear or sympathy, acceptance or rejection. However, in the midst of this uncertainty, how often do we truly pause to see refugees as people? Not as an issue to be solved or a number to be counted, but as individuals, each with a name, a story, and a life beyond conflict. For me, this issue resonates with me on a deeply personal level. It's about the emotional experience of displacement, the feeling of not quite belonging anywhere. Having spent almost half my life navigating between different cultures, I've come to understand what it means to exist in between. To never fully fit into one place or another. And maybe, in that feeling, we may have more in common with refugees than we realize. My understanding of belonging didn't spark from a single moment. Rather, it was a slow and continuous process of growing awareness of my self-identity. Born and raised in Korea, I was subjected to Western culture and education since a young age. I have never attended a Korean school, nor have I ever learned under a Korean curriculum. Instead, since kindergarten, I've always went to American schools, or as a lot of Koreans call it, Yongyu, which briefly translates to Korean kindergarten. I mean English kindergarten. It's a place where children are primarily taught in English by English-speaking teachers. And because of this reason, I've met various people from various different backgrounds. The most of my teachers were from the US. I've also had teachers from the UK, Canada, Malaysia, China, and the list goes on. I could, to some degree, describe myself as a melting pot, having been raised by a fusion of various different cultures, perspectives, experiences, some that resonate with Korea, and others that do not. Whenever I went to Hallwon or private after-school academies and met Korean students who went to Korean schools, our conversations would always start the same. 야, 영어로 말해봐, or hey, say something in English. I cracked jokes only to be met with blank stares, humor that made sense in my classroom but didn't quite translate here. And whenever they talked about things like going to 문방구's after school with their friends, flipping through kids' stationaries, debating on which mechanical pencil was the best, I couldn't help but feel left out, caught between two worlds. It wasn't long before I began questioning myself. Was I more Korean or Western? I didn't fit into either category and would often joke with my friends about how we were 영계국어, or too bad at both Korean and English to be considered fluent speakers. It was our way of describing ourselves as the odd ones out. We were too Western to be considered fully Korean, and too Korean to be considered fully Western. Sometimes I would start a sentence with one language only to change to another in the middle because I just couldn't find the right word. But this translation isn't just about language. It It was about balancing two worlds at once. Some things that would be considered perfectly fine at my school would be considered rude at home. It was as if there was an invisible line. On one side, there was the Korean stress on collectivism and formality, and on the other was the Western emphasis on self-expression and individuality. Soon, I began to realize that this struggle for identity wasn't just mine alone. I began seeing it in others. Classmates who had to move countries, friends who felt like strangers in their own homes. But most importantly, those who didn't have a choice. It wasn't a product of choice, but a matter of survival. And then I saw my own search for belonging. And that's beyond any reason is why this talk matters. I began to realize that the refugee experience extended beyond war or persecution. It was navigating an uncertain world with fractured identities. If I, someone who lived a relatively stable life, still suffered from belonging, how much greater would the burden be for refugees? This perspective allowed me to see refugees not merely as pitiful people, criminals, or products of war, but individuals in the face of a harsh reality where empathy had been replaced by hostility. Often, refugees are seen as economic burdens. As LSE describes them, refugees are collective invaders, criminals who threaten national security. But I wanted to look beyond these hate-filled narratives. I wanted to see refugees as people. This led me to a program called 난민과의 대화, or Conversations with a Refugee, where I was able to meet and listen to refugees in person. For about 6 months, I worked with a team of fellow students to organize an event to bring together refugees from all over the world and listen to their stories. Hosted by an NGO dedicated to helping refugees resettle in Korea, the event brought together refugees from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Cameroon, and the list goes on. It was my job to create a world map showing the top refugee-producing countries, along with the refugee speaker introduction cards for our visitors who were mainly town residents. It was our goal to challenge the misconception many people have about refugees by showing them that they too were human. After listening to the speakers, one thing that stood out to me was their collective agreement that the biggest struggle they ever faced wasn't uprooting their lives, but the harsh stares that they received here in Korea. One of the speakers, Naeem, who was from Afghanistan, was forced to leave after the Taliban took over his home, targeting him for being a Hazara, ethnically marginalized groups. When I asked him what his biggest struggle was, I expected him to talk about the pain of having to leave his home country. Instead, he told me it was his inability to pursue his passion for engineering because nobody was willing to hire a Muslim engineer. Unfortunately, his experiences aren't unique. Discrimination against Muslims in Korea is pervasive. In Daegu, for example, as NPR notes, residents who opposed the construction of a mosque went as far to display pig heads in front of the site. Nangmai's story, on the other hand, started like any other. She lived a simple life with her family, studying in Myanmar. But everything changed when she turned 14. War erupted, reducing her hometown into ruins. When I asked her what her biggest struggle was, she told me it was being labeled as a refugee, as if that was all she was. After listening to the refugees, I realized that they were no different from you and me. They were people with dreams, families, and in many ways, a reflection of myself. Like Nangmai and Naeem, I too knew what it was like to not belong. However, according to UNHCR, Nang Mai and Naeem are just 2 out of 43.7 million refugees worldwide. This number reflects a growing crisis. Recently, natural disasters or financial instabilities are no longer rare occasions, but regular headlines on the evening news. This highlights a fundamental truth that cannot be ignored. The refugee crisis will only continue to escalate. However, instead of addressing the causes of displacement, we often react in fear. People are underprepared with the media spreading misinformation. After the ISIS organized terrorist attacks on Paris, a survey conducted by White revealed that over 46% of French residents believe refugees will lead to increased terrorist attacks. Yet this misconception isn't just unique to Europe. In my survey of over 200 Jeju residents, many associated refugees with words such as dangerous or criminal. Some simply wrote, don't like. Yet many also admitted that they had never met a refugee before. Then, how do such strong feelings form without personal experience? Here's where things get interesting. Those who have met refugees, whether by volunteer programs or just by pure chance, see them differently. Surprisingly, proximity didn't breed prejudice. It led to familiarity. While the hardship that refugees face in their home communities are often unavoidable, the struggles they have to endure in their new communities usually stem from societal attitudes, something we can change. But beyond empathy, the real question is, why should we care? As a student attending an international school, one of my goals is to study abroad. Of course, my reasons for departure is greatly different from those of a refugee. We share one thing in common. We are all outsiders in the eyes of others. However, if prejudice against refugees continues to prevail in my community, those of us hoping to live or study abroad could become the targets of the same bigotry. After just a couple of hours of flight, we may shift from being a part of the majority to being a part of the minority. This shift was clear during the COVID-19 pandemic when hate crimes against Asians rose by 150% according to PubMed. Asians became the target of crime because of their perceived foreignness. But here's the thing, we cannot condemn these people as we are doing the exact things that they have done. There's even a word for this in Korean, 내로남불. We oppress refugees because, to us, they are the outsiders, the criminals, the danger. Yet, to be accepted, we must first be accepting. If we were suddenly forced to leave, where would we go? Who would we become? But most importantly, how would we want to be treated? The reality is that we may one day find ourselves in the exact position of those we hesitate to help today. Understanding and accepting refugees isn't just about them. It's about preparing for the world we are inevitably heading towards. This starts from an individual level. Engage with refugees, talk to them, listen to them, understand their struggles. Attend workshops, read books, volunteer in programs that help refugees. If we make the effort to learn about their struggles, we will soon see that they are people with talents and dreams, people with the same human dignity that we all share. For those of us living between cultures like myself, this will also help us overcome our isolation. It fosters an environment where differences are welcomed, where identities are not seen as barriers but as bridges. When we reach out, we don't just build homes for others, we also find them for ourselves. From a political level, governments should redirect refugees towards industries facing severe labor shortages such as agriculture. This isn't exploitation. Refugees actively seek work, and by providing them with stable jobs, it can also boost the economy. When refugees are given the opportunity to work and contribute to society, they will cease to be seen as burdens or outsiders. They will soon become colleagues, neighbors, and friends. If refugees are inevitable, we must prepare for them in ways that can benefit us all. The question is, are we willing to embrace this reality? Thank you.